It doesn't matter what you do in any career or business. If you don't put your health, fitness, and your mind first, none of this will matter. A post you might do might be only 10,000. You might go, oh, but how many people get the opportunity to speak to 10,000 people? Social media has to be something that needs to be embraced. In a world where AI is going to be the dominating factor, your currency is going to be trust and authenticity. I've already mentioned authenticity. We forget often that, the browser can download so many different extensions and tools to be able to, what most people see as additional functionality to allow them to do their day job, typically. Now, in their own personal environment, it's broadly left open. So if you're working for an organization and you're working on a system or laptop that is not managed by the corporate organization, you potentially open up to all these types of vulnerabilities.
So hi Darren, welcome to our Be Fearless podcast. So today I'm super excited to welcome an exceptional leader in cybersecurity space, Darren brings over 2 decades of cybersecurity and technology expertise at the highest levels at global organizations, including Standard Chartered Bank, Qantas Airlines, S&P Global, and IBM. So he is recognized among the top 100 CISOs globally, and he has also received the SANS Institute Innovator of the Year Award, and most recently, inaugural Chief Security Officer Top 30 Leadership Award for Asia. So what's more impressive is how Darren is also a cybersecurity mentor, coach, and educator, and in 2018, Darren co-founded the Cyber Leadership Institute, an organization dedicated to building the next generation of senior cybersecurity leaders with customers in over 70 countries. So he also recently launched his YouTube channel, delivering insights for those looking to stand out from the crowd and become an authority in cybersecurity. So Darren, welcome to the show. We're thrilled to have you. Yeah. You have such an amazing background where you started off. I haven't seen that many people that started off from having their own bar. And I saw that in 90s you owned a bar. And how did this journey come about that you went into cybersecurity in the first place?
Yeah, I'll give you the short version. So I actually, the short version is I was working in restaurants and bars and nightclubs with my brother. We were kind of in partnership. And in one particular restaurant, this girl walks in and I almost just fell in love immediately. This particular girl is now my wife, actually. But she lived many, many miles away down south of England. I was living in the north of England. She was up there on a trip with friends. And she worked for a company called Whitbread. And at that time, I'd literally left the kind of bar and restaurant industry. And she said, there's a role come up managing people on a help desk. And I knew nothing about technology or help desks or anything like that. But I always knew how to lead and manage people. So the employer employed me and I started working there. And it wasn't long before the help desk role turned into a business continuity role. It was the year 2000 when we were going through this click over from 1999 to 2000. Mm-hmm. And then I was asked from business continuity to cybersecurity was kind of a natural transition. And then I worked at IBM, and the kind of rest is history because it just became almost like a 25-year history of just being in cybersecurity, which I've loved. It's been a fantastic profession to be part of because not only do I feel that we are enjoying our roles on a day-to-day basis because there's lots of challenges, and there is, it's something different every day. But there's an element of feeling that you're doing something for the greater good, and I think a lot of cybersecurity professionals feel that there's kind of bigger cause that you can be part of. So that was the short story of me getting into it.
Yeah. I think as I speak to cybersecurity leaders, what I find very intriguing is that a lot of them didn't necessarily have that pure cybersecurity background. And back then, it wasn't even a profession that people like always naturally thought about, and this is something that a lot of people went through, like trial and error, and then ended up in cybersecurity. So I think it's one of the most unusual and interesting stories I've heard. I haven't heard anyone going into cybersecurity from this field. But I also would love to know how you became an educator. You recently published a book, The Cyber Leadership Imperative, and on top of that, you also have your own YouTube channel that teaches security professionals how to level up their careers. So what's the story behind that?
Yeah, so since 2018, me and my two co-founders, we met. I was living in Sydney at the time. We met through some mutual friends, and then the three of us ended up having coffee. And over the discussion over coffee, we kind of almost stumbled upon what we believed was the next big gap for cybersecurity professionals. And what was happening, which is what been happening for the last 10 years, a lot of cybersecurity professionals have been getting more and more senior and been invited into the boardroom. Mm-hmm. Now, cybersecurity professionals, by their general nature, are technical and are not used to sitting in front of board members. But now they've been thrust into the limelight and having to transition from this professional to an executive, and knowing how to communicate with the board, how to talk about strategy, and how to be influential and impactful was something that it just wasn't taught by anybody. So we pioneered the Cyber Leadership Institute, which focused on cyber leadership. And it's called the Cyber Leadership Program, actually, which focused extensively on how do you transition from a cybersecurity professional into a cybersecurity executive. So that's been the focus of our efforts since 2018. We're now in over, as you mentioned, over 70 countries. And the book that we published just last year focuses on those aspects as well, which is, how do you need to prepare for an interview? How do you be successful for an interview? How do you stand out from the crowd? How do you increase your brand equity so that people see you? And cybersecurity professionals just don't do that. They kind of hide away, don't want to be too transparent. And then really it's about how do you build and lead high performance teams, because cybersecurity professionals only manage small teams generally when they first start off. But when you become an executive, like I did, you're managing teams of 200 upwards. So not only do you have to know cybersecurity intimately and be able to communicate it with the board of directors and regulators, but you also need to know how to build and manage a high performance team. So all these skills, you just don't learn as a cybersecurity professional. So that's where we focused our attention. And the YouTube channel does that, but it's kind of a free resource, really. So the Cyber Leadership, obviously, you pay for the programs and you join the platform. But I'm just kind of using the YouTube channel to give some kind of free advice away to anybody that wants to use it, really. So supplemental
like a trailer.
To what we do. Yeah.
I definitely see the value, because as I speak to a lot of CISOs out there, I think one of the top problems that a lot of them communicate is that, hey, you can be excellent when it comes to technical standpoint, but you also have to have this ability to take the conversations into the boardroom, because at the end of the day, you have to also be the translator when it comes to technology. You have to be able to speak to technical teams and at the same time also leadership teams. And it is something that defines a really great CISO, is who is able to go through this transition.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I saw you also have a very interesting video, actually, that how to reach $1 million salary on your channel. I'm sure this is super interesting for all the CISOs out there. So how do you fast track to this kind of salary?
Yeah, well, that's kind of the idea behind it, is that one of the things I talk about a lot is it took me, 25 years, 2.5 decades to get to where I am today. And what we want to do in the Cyber Leadership Institute and more broadly in my coaching and mentoring is help those leaders who are focused on becoming a senior executive in a large corporate, for example. How can they do it at pace? How can they accelerate their careers? And I in that video, actually, I tried to break it down to a number of different things that I thought would help fast track you to get there. And for those that have not subscribed or had a look at the video, please go look for Darren Argyle on the YouTube channel, and you'll see this video, which will go into a lot of detail. But I'll just tell you briefly what it talked about. So the first thing was, and there were 5 key principles essentially. The first one was get the foundations right, which goes without saying. And you don't necessarily need a technical background, but you certainly need to get the right certifications. So CISSP and CISM are 2 certifications that are generally accepted for at least a manager level. So every organization and regulators are going to be asking for that. So get those foundations right. Obviously get the years of experience. That's what you're also going to need. And I would also suggest that you find a good set of mentors who can help you embed those foundations. And mentorship is always going to be an accelerator for you in your career. So that's number one. The second thing is, and I've already mentioned this already, which is building a personal brand. And this is super important that we pay a little attention to. I mean, if you want to build trust with somebody quickly, people will typically find, especially today, they'll try to find out who you are to some degree. So one of the first things they'll do is they'll type your name in Google and see what comes up on the first page. And actually what does come up on the first page, I don't know if you've ever done this, but that is your personal brand, effectively. So what can you do to positively affect that, so that when people seek out a leader, they have a positive experience of learning a little bit about them, either through video or articles, that positions them as an authority in their field. And this has 2 benefits, obviously externally, but it also does this positioning internally as well as being seen as an authority, because board members and executives also look you up. So that's the second thing. Third thing is leadership skills. Now, leadership skills is very broad, but it's the true career accelerator. But this is all about having influence and persuasion skills, essentially. So being able to communicate in a way that is impactful and, can impact multiple stakeholders. And that's where a lot of what we talk about in the cyber leadership focuses. The last one, the fourth one is increasing your net worth through entrepreneurship. Pursuing a career and a business is the ideal scenario, because just pursuing a business can take a long time to build, and you're not necessarily making any money. So that'd be my first thing. So if possible, try to build something on the side, more like a side hustle, and just play around with a few businesses. Obviously, be transparent with your organization that you're doing it, and most will allow that these days, as long as there's clear transparency and you don't interfere with your work. But, things like shares and equity in organizations can literally go through the roof. I know one startup in Poland, actually, who just got investment of over 5 million, and he's only been going 5 months. So, you can only imagine what that business will be like in a very short space of time, just because he built a business. So it's a really quick accelerator. And then the last thing that I talk about a lot, which is, it doesn't matter what you do in any career or business, if you don't put your health, fitness, and your mind first, none of this will matter. And we've got a huge problem in cybersecurity with mental health issues, people turning to drugs and alcohol because of the stresses. It's a really stressful environment. So I put the number 5 one at the top of all those things, I guess at the center of it. There is one thing that I did mention, but it's kind of number 6 is when you think about net worth, always find a career in a country where you're paying less tax. So it sounds obvious, but a good friend of mine was working in the UK, and she was looking to move into a senior role. And I said, look, spend some time in a country where you'll be paying less tax because you'll be working for the same amount of money, but you'll be taking home a lot more. So that's my pro tip. If you really want to make a lot of money quickly in cybersecurity, is spend some of your time in a country that has a low tax incentives.
That's amazing advice. We have a few CISOs based out of Singapore listening to it. So this is amazing advice for whoever is working in a low tax country.
Yes, absolutely.
Makes it very convenient. But I really want to touch upon that point that you made about how to take self-care and everything, more from the perspective of right now, it's still a bit of a taboo to speak of whatever is going on within your organization. And I can imagine how much of a emotional build-up can come with it, right? Because you're trying to advance in your career, but at the same time, you can't really share whatever challenges your organization is going through. How do you sort of mentally prepare cybersecurity leaders, and what kind of advice could you give them when it comes to sharing or not sharing their personal journeys?
Yeah, I think it's important, first of all, for people to be vulnerable, share their personal journeys. That level of authenticity that people give out comes back, so people show empathy for people that are authentic. And actually, whether you believe this or not, I mentioned it recently in a post, authenticity vibrates higher than love as a frequency. So, it's a powerful frequency that we can align ourselves to, whether you believe that or not. It's something I believe in. So being authentic, that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think, it's really important to become part of a community. We all need a sense of belonging and build relationships. And hopefully some people have that at home with family or even close friends, but not everybody does, especially those that are working particularly hard in a career where they're just focused on their job. And in a highly stressful environment like cybersecurity, sometimes the best alternative to close family and friends is peer networks in a community. And it's something that in the Cyber Leadership Institute, for example, we've put a heavy focus on. So when you join a community of like-minded individuals, and, we have events and conferences, and when we meet up, we have these meetup groups, we come together. And it shouldn't be always about, meeting up and having a drink and letting your hair down, but that sometimes happens. I mean, I don't drink much these days, if at all. But it's really about those connections and this opportunity to share experiences with potentially peers who can understand. I think that's really important.
Yeah. And I think when we talk about community and building that community, going back again to personal branding, this is super important to grow that community. So do you have any particular, let's say, 3 immediate actions that people should take when it comes to building their personal brand and just standing out there?
I think that the first thing is just do it, first of all, because one of the first things that tends to hold most people back is literally just having the confidence to do something about their personal brand. And doing something about your personal brand means getting out there and telling people your story, so people can connect with your story. So that's the first thing, is just actually get on it, get out and do it. Now, the challenge, I think, is that many people have been constrained through thinking it's just about physical, going to conferences and things like that. That's helpful. But we do have a obviously digital attention economy now that we can engage with. And, many people might go, oh, well, if I do a video online, I only get, 10 likes or whatever. But what they fail to miss or misunderstand is, okay, you might only get 10 likes or whatever likes you get, but often these posts go out to thousands of people. So if you were to translate that to the physical world, you as somebody who's maybe largely unknown, but you're being seen by thousands of people, that's quite significant. I mean, only a post you might do might be only 10,000. You might go, oh, but how many people get the opportunity to speak to 10,000 people, right?
Yeah.
And I think then, so that's the first thing, is do these things. And social media has to be something that needs to be embraced. I did a post about this recently, in fact today, which was, in a world where AI is going to be the dominating factor, your currency is going to be trust and authenticity. Everybody mentioned authenticity. So, you're going to have to differentiate yourself. So use all the platforms, not just one. You can use LinkedIn's obviously the primary one for businesses, for business people, I should say. But, try out Instagram, try out even YouTube, those different channels. That's super important. They're with the key things I would suggest people do. But don't come out with stories that's not you. You have to be you have to be you, and people can relate to you. But doing conferences, writing articles, doing blogs, even writing your own book, becoming an author is something I learned a little bit too late, because when you do a search on Google, authorship comes up as the top hit. LinkedIn's the next one. So, being an author, writing a book, again, it's either a story or a topic that you're passionate about. So, and I talk about this a lot, so I think it's super important.
Yeah, definitely. I just want to emphasize one more time how important it is to share your own journey when you ahead of cybersecurity, right? And whether it's doing podcasts like this one or writing just a simple post out there, I think a lot of cybersecurity leaders right now underestimate the power that it brings out there, because there are so many aspiring professionals or other cybersecurity leaders that need to hear someone else's personal story and think it's okay, I'm not the only one that goes through this experience. And as you rightfully mentioned, you get 10 likes, but then at the end of the day, if we bring it to, let's say, similar scenario happening on the stage, right? You spoke about something and then 10 people clapped, but how many people listened to what you actually said?
Exactly.
So this is very transformational. I wanted to go deeper into cybersecurity trends, because you're also a cybersecurity leader in Standard Chartered Bank. So tell us more about your day there. How do you combine the two? And I just don't know how you find enough hours in a day.
Yeah, well, I guess the first thing is, when it comes to the Cyber Leadership Institute, a lot of that was built before joining Standard Chartered. And on joining Standard Chartered, I became the chairman. So I was so I've been in this non-executive director role whilst I've been working at Standard Chartered, which has been helpful because it's allowed me to kind of separate myself from the business, day-to-day business, and working obviously at the bank. The balancing out of the two is always a challenge. And I think this would be true of anything that you dedicate any time to outside of your work. But I'm super disciplined. I mean, I literally go to the gym every single morning. I'm very ruthless about where I spend my time and who I spend my time with. I delegate brilliantly. That's one of my skills. I've got a huge team in Standard Chartered of over 200 people, but I've got an exceptional leadership skill team underneath me that I fully empowered to make decisions, whether I'm there or away on holiday. And this ability to get the balancing right between both is literally the art of delegation. It has to be that. The day-to-day role in the bank is extremely challenging, as you can imagine. It's a global role that you regularly engage with regulators, some of the biggest regulators in the world internationally, who demand that you meet their strict criteria of the regulatory mandates that they put out on a regular basis. There's a level of maturity and assurance that the bank expects to demonstrate that we're moving in the right direction to satisfy not only regulatory demands but also the demands of our customers, because they're trusting us with their funds and their equity and all their financial records. So we need to be able to protect that, to make sure that we're keeping it safe, including their own personal data. So that is a huge task. But It's a team effort. It's not, although, and a lot of people ask as well, it must be very difficult kind of with all this responsibility.
Yeah.
It is. It is. There's obviously a level of responsibility that comes with a very senior role, especially at a group level role. And that you do have days where it's ultimately, there's a lot to do and it can be quite stressful, especially when you're preparing for committees, etc. But I think the most important thing is if you've got a really good team and you've invested in their education, then they've got your back. And likewise, the peer stakeholders that you network with internally, they've got your back, and you've built those relationships up. And then the last thing is having very strong mentors outside of the organization. So even though I've got very senior, about as high as you can get in my profession, I still rely very heavily on other mentors who would do a similar role to me or on the same level. But also, interestingly, speaking to your generation, actually, a younger generation, because I've also got mentors who are a lot younger than me, and they teach me things about, how to connect with the younger generation on a different level. So if I'm communicating to my whole team of 200, they're not all my age. I've got people, younger as you and probably younger, actually. So, how do I connect with them, engage with them, and get them to all move in the right direction? So I seek mentorship from the younger generation as well, who can help me move in the right direction. And I think having this always learning mindset is helpful.
That is very interesting. I think you're the first person that I hear saying learning from younger generation. Everyone says that they learn from younger generation, but they don't say, "Hey, I have a sort of mentor who is younger generation." It's super interesting. I wanted, like you touched upon the topic of regulations. And because this is something that you do practically every day, just making sure from regulatory standpoint, everything is safe, everything is protected when it comes to customers. Do you think, how do you find that balance between following regulations, but at the same time making sure that the company is performing beyond regulations? Because regulations can be as a starting point when it comes to companies' cybersecurity, but a lot of things happen beyond regulations, right? So how do you make sure that you strike that balance?
So the number one thing is to recognize that all regulations at some point need to be looked at, universally across the globe. And then, especially when you're operating as a large global bank, and there's a lot of correlation to be done of all those regulatory bodies. And then they get distilled into global policy and standards. Policy and standards in a large corporate organization are typically the expression of your risk appetite. So that's the first thing. And the risk appetite is ultimately something that strikes the balance between business benefits, because it's a commercial organization that needs to meet shareholder responsibilities, whilst keeping the data and the customer's information safe, whilst also satisfying, regulatory demands. But the top of the agenda really is defending the organization from a major cyber crisis. That's ultimately the thing that you're focused on. So to do that, in the absence of policy and standards and regulations and everything else, what you've got to focus on is some essential things that, some critical things that will make all the difference. This is knowing where your critical assets are, your crown jewels. Defining who are going to be your top threat actors that are going to be targeting you. That's the second thing. And then the third thing is, then we're looking at those essential controls, and there's usually only a small number of essential controls that you would deploy to your environment as a set of hygiene. So this is your prioritization. Something like, if you were to identify your crown jewels, understand the top threats, and deploy an essential set of controls, you're going to mitigate 80% of the threats that are out there. And often we forget to do the basics and focus on all the highly sophisticated things that need doing. So that's what I would say when it comes to that. And whenever you're speaking to regulators, one of the things that they're most concerned about is systemic risk. So they don't want you to be the weak link within an ecosystem. The ecosystems is another one you could go in, a big topic in itself, but we're only as strong as the weakest link. So things like third-party risk are super important these days. And I was speaking to a group of directors recently, Nigerian directors actually, board of directors, who are interested in this particular topic. So I think this is important.
This is super important. And I think when it comes to securing the crown jewels of any organizations, I just think from the topic of browser security, because today browser becomes this world where most of SaaS applications are accessed via browser. So, and we do a lot of research into it. So what do you think are the biggest challenges in securing employees' browser activity, because this becomes the entry point for so many attackers out there? I'm just curious, what are your thoughts around this?
Yeah, it is. And I think, obviously the browser is a single point of failure potentially for any organization, in the same way that email is as well, because it's a primary communication channel that's used by everybody potentially in an organization. So, sync jacking is something more recently that's come up as a deception technique used by attackers to, get people to do things that they shouldn't normally do within a browsing environment, and once compromised can lose important information, compromise the organization, and lead to even bigger attacks. So it's very serious issues. Yeah. I mean, there are, to my mind, some essential things that you need to do. And I think the first thing is, especially with something like sync jacking, is we forget often that the browser can download so many different extensions and tools to be able to, what most people see as additional functionality to allow them to do their day job typically. Now, in their own personal environment, it's broadly left open. So if you're working for an organization and you're working on a system or laptop that is not managed by the corporate organization, you potentially open up to all these types of vulnerabilities. In a larger organization, there'll be an element of it locking down, so you can't download some of these extensions, and there'll be things like browser isolation that will be used as a tool within that platform. So that's the one thing. But so on a personal front, only using verifiable download or extensions. That would be the first thing. The second thing is two-factor authentication is one of those essential controls that I mentioned earlier. And we often forget that whenever you're accessing something of a particular sensitive nature, and every website that we go on these days, is obviously a login, email and password, but there's typically an option for two-factor authentication, and people never really take much notice about applying that. But it's such a powerful security measure to implement. And if you look at any of the essentials control around the world, it will always be in the top 10 of one control that you need to apply. Updating software regularly. I mean, how many times do we get, software updates on our mobile devices? We get the same amount of software updates on our browsers. Make sure that they're updated, or even use technology that forces you to update them. Education and awareness in a corporate organization, you're going to have to, some things will always get through. I mean, the recent sync jacking vulnerabilities, some of them were zero day. So, there weren't necessarily patches available. And sometimes even when a patch is available, there'll be a delay between when the patch is available and when the organization deploys it. And actually that's the gap. And there's this window of opportunity that attackers take to deploy their software, obviously cause people to either download something or click on a link through the browser, or take them to a website that's malicious, and then they have all their credentials captured. So, having that software being updated on a regular basis is super important. Configuration, I mentioned browser isolation, but corporate organizations need to be having strict standards in place and making sure that they configure browsers securely. And they're the main things I can think of. And obviously, I know that your organization has technical tools that can help with that specific challenge as well, which is becoming more and more prevalent.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. In today's world, as employees spend more than 90% of the day on the browser, this is something that, as sooner or later, has to be protected. So, this is an inevitable nature of where the industry is evolving. So, this is yet to be the biggest entry point. But I'm curious if this is something that you see an issue within financial services industry.
You're going to see it in financial services industry, but I think, quite honestly, you're going to see it in every industry. I don't think it's specific. The only challenge you've got potentially is that you've got a bigger attack surface potentially with a financial services just by the size of the organization. Obviously, you've potentially got more sophisticated threat actors that might be interested in going after a financial services organization, not just for the data and the opportunity for a ransomware attack, but also for the opportunity to steal funds, which ultimately could be a goal of some particular attackers. So you've got different goals of different attackers depending on the organization. Fortunately, for most large financial organizations, specifically banking I'm talking about, they do invest quite heavily in lots of great tools, solutions, capabilities, and even educational tools and platforms for their people. So they are better protected than most. But the challenge that I think even a large corporate bank would have, in the same way that you'd have any large corporate would have, is that you are connected to multiple third parties who may not have had the level of investment that you've had, which is why it's super important that you secure the supply chain to make sure that, the first, second, third, fourth, all the way down to the nth party are secure. So if you have a standard in a large organization for securing the browser, you should bet and hope that the organization is not only adhering to your standards, but you are checking on a regular basis that they are, because they potentially leave an open back door into your organization.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the bigger challenges out there when we talk about any big threats that are coming up in 2025. Third-party risk is always one among the top 5 when it comes to it. So I'm curious, what kind of advice would you give to CISOs when it comes to their security challenges, whether it's browser security, third-party risk? What kind of advice would you give?
Yeah, look, I think we're moving into a world where AI is becoming quite dominant. So, the investment in tools and technology to defend against AI attacks whilst putting in place defensive measures using AI is creating this, what I call an AI paradox, where you've got, the attackers and the defenders using these tools, and they've got this constant escalation between each party. So I think that's probably the greatest challenge that I think we face, in the next few years. I mean, even things like deep fakes that were not even possible even a year ago now are very convincing. And we've seen a number of incidents now where use of deep fakes using AI technology to convince, the finance team or the CEO to take actions that they wouldn't normally take, being convinced that voice that they hear is somebody in their department, or that face that they can see is somebody with authority to make them do things. So I definitely think that that's the most important thing. I think the other thing, though, is not to lose sight of those essentials. And I think it's easy to forget that, those critical few key controls are what's going to make all the difference. And even when I think about AI and introducing AI into an environment, how do you make sure that is secure by design? Secure by design is a key principle of cybersecurity. So start there. So everything that is built or introduced into your environment has gone through some rigorous cybersecurity checks to make sure the appropriate controls are there. And then obviously as it goes into the environment is rigorously tested, either through red team testing or penetration team testing. And it's the same with applications that you build or products that go into the market, that we're doing those appropriate tests. So that's what I would say. Probably some of you've already mentioned third party. I still think that's a huge risk that we still need to find ways to manage. But that's more of an ecosystem, and you're going to be reliant on the larger organizations to step up and be quite intentional about doing that by partnering with governments and other private public partnerships to make sure that not only of small businesses following the checks, but they've also got access to free resources from the government. And the Cybersecurity Agency in Singapore does a really good job of helping small businesses secure themselves so that they can do business in an economy that's partnership led.
Yeah, I think all of this trends are probably the top of every CISO mind right now, whether it's third party risk, deepfakes, AI, because when it comes to AI, it's not only how it helps attackers to break into your system, but also how it potentially can cause data leakage within your organization, right? Because that's another risk that it adds. How do I make sure that my employees can go about and use some of the Gen AI tools without potentially leaking super sensitive information? I think this is something that I've heard has been on the top of mind of every CISO out there. So this continue to be the challenges, and hopefully we see more solutions out there that can help with it. So in closing, something fun that we like to do on our podcast, Darren, is we have our previous guest ask question for the next guest. So our previous guest asked, what was a defining moment in your career where you faced fear, took a bold risk, and rose above it? How did it shape your approach to cybersecurity and leadership today?
Took a bold risk. So the bold risk was definitely moving from the UK to Australia to join Qantas Airways at the time. So leaving a global fintech in the UK, leaving my family behind, actually, my two twin daughters who had just gone to university. But taking that bold risk has become one of the best decisions I've ever made, not only for my career, which has flourished and done very well, but also for my personal circumstances. I'm now a permanent resident of Australia because of the step that I took. I live literally I can see the ocean with a huge kind of forest just in front of me. So I can do beach walks every day. And, so I've kind of, that one bold step. And I also had the opportunity between Australia to go work in Singapore, obviously working for Standard Chartered Bank. So that kind of balance of, being able to elevate my career through doing these different things and having a personal life that I really enjoy has been fantastic. And one of my daughters has just literally moved over here, so even better.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and the other one's not far behind, probably.
I can see, in the past it might have been like a bigger challenge whether to make this decision or not. But today you definitely get all the fruits of this decision. And what question would you like to ask our next guest?
Gosh. Okay, it'd be about leadership because that's something that I'm passionate about. So as a senior leader or senior practitioner in cybersecurity, what are the 3 leadership traits that you believe have been most impactful for you in terms of your own leadership and the teams that you have led over the years? Leadership traits.
Very deep question.
Yes.
Well, we'll see who is going to answer that. Well, thank you so much, Darren, for being part of the Fearless podcast. It's been so much fun. We've learned so much, whether it's your how to become an educator, how do you grow as a CISO, or how do you just navigate the risks when it comes to today's challenges in cybersecurity space. So it's been a lot of fun. Thank you, Darren.
Great. Thank you. Really enjoyed it.